erase that. Whoa, 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 whoa. Oh, that's cool. I can share. All right, 5 minutes, and we will begin. Let's get some. Yo, what's up, guys? All right, we're going to start in 5 minutes. If there's anything you want to review in particular, if there's anything you want me to go over, you got to put your question in the chat. Otherwise, I'll go over the most commonly predictable themes for this U.S. History Regents. We'll start in just a couple minutes. All right, here we go. How do we write a civics literacy essay? Who is your teacher? Who is your teacher, Nyla Brown? Fear not. I don't know what level U.S. history you took this year. If you took AP U.S. history, you're going to have no problem with this. If you're on grade level U.S. history, writing the essay, it's not difficult. There's 3 parts to it, and maybe we'll start by going over the whole test, okay? There are 3 parts to this test. The first part is the multiple choice section. There's 28 multiple choice questions. I'm going to pull up the last test and then share my screen and we can look at it together. Select the tab to share. Sure. Yeah, share that, man. Share that. All right, so the first 28 questions of this test are multiple choice questions. They'll give you a STEM. Again, the test is tomorrow, so I'm hoping most of you feel very comfortable with the parts of the test. And then they give you a couple multiple choice questions. The content is fairly predictable if you've done a couple of practice tests. You see the content that is commonly assessed in U.S. history in New York State. Can't see my screen. Can you see now? It's black. All right. Let's figure that out. Well, let's give up. "28 multiple choice questions. 28 multiple choice questions. Now, the question was about the civics literacy essay, but let's for a second here look at question 29. This is the exact question for question 29. Describe the historical context surrounding these documents. You will have this exact question for 29. And then the second part of question 29 will be this exact question. Identify and explain the relationship between the events and or ideas found in these documents. How are these two documents connected? And then they give you choices, cause and effect, similarity or difference. You don't have to discuss both of those. Or turning point. Question 30, again, this is January, and this one was on, these documents were on voting. Oh, Susan B. Anthony, what an absolute legend in New York State. Susan B. Anthony was arrested for voting. She was arrested for voting because at this time women could not vote in New York State, and she exercised some civil disobedience. She broke the law. She was incarcerated for it. This test loves to ask questions about how women gain the right to vote in the United States, and specifically in New York State, because it is a New York State test. Question 30, here it is. This is the exact question. The only thing that perhaps will change is where it says document 2, analyze document 2. They might ask you to analyze document 1, but the rest of the question will be verbatim this question. For whatever document they ask you to analyze, they want you to explain how one of these things, audience, purpose, bias, or point of view, choose one of those 4 and explain how that impacts this document's use as a reliable source of evidence. Then here are the documents on this last test, which come from the colonial period. And then here's the civics literacy essay, Nyla Brown. The civics literacy essay. These are the exact questions for the civics literacy essay. First part will be describe the historical circumstances surrounding this issue. So what is happening in the United States at this time? What is the background to this issue, to this problem? They will give you usually 2 documents that will identify the background for you, but it's important that you include some outside information in this essay, and usually historical circumstances is a nice place to do it. Explain what people did to address this issue, individuals, groups, or government. How did they interact with, how did they try to address this problem, whatever this document set problem presents? Last June, what was it last June? I think it was Japanese internment 1 year ago. And then the third one asks you to describe the impact. So these are the 3 things you have to do of their efforts. So Nyla, I would like you to think about evaluate the impacts of their efforts. Because if you're evaluating, then you're analyzing. And if you're analyzing, you're going to get the highest score you can get on this essay. You got to use you want to use 4 documents. Use all the documents if you have time and you feel comfortable. But make sure you do these 3 things. This is how you're going to be awarded points, Nyla, on this test. All right. Are there any content questions, guys? I'm looking at the comments. I appreciate all the comments. Prophet, is there any, Nyla, is there any content in particular you guys would like to review? And if the answer is no, all right, Reconator, I appreciate the question, boss. The Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl, let's get this off my screen so you can see me again. The Dust Bowl refers to the drought in the Great Plains during the 1920s into the Great Depression, the 1930s. They do like to ask about the Dust Bowl, and they will ask you perhaps which New Deal program addressed the Dust Bowl. The answer to that would be the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. That was part of the New Deal that sent young men 18 to 25 out into the wilderness, into natural areas, and they built trails. They built some water conservation irrigation systems to help combat the Dust Bowl and help rejuvenate the American landscape. Let's see. Next question. The Virginia plan. The Virginia plan. Okay. You might see a question on the Virginia plan. The first few multiple choice questions deal with what's up, Tej? Love Tej. Tej is great student, great guy. Thanks for tuning in. The Virginia plan refers to a compromise. It's a plan suggested by James Madison at the Constitutional Convention, and refers to the idea that bigger states, at this time Virginia is one of the bigger states, the more populated states, should get more votes in Congress. And, Rhode Island, New Jersey, less populated states had an issue with that because they would get voted out. They would have a hard time getting programs that they want through. So they compromised, right? You have the New Jersey plan, you have the Virginia plan. The New Jersey plan wanted every state to have the same amount of votes in Congress. And the compromise is the Great Compromise, which gave us a bicameral legislature, 2 House legislature. We have 2 senators, and that's a fixed number. Every state has 2 senators. But in the House of Reps, how many votes you get is directly tied to how many people live in your state. So the House of Reps, bigger states can outvote smaller states in the House of Reps. The presidents to know. Nyla Brown, where do you go to school? Great question. Some presidents that you need to know. George Washington, they love to ask questions about his farewell address. When George Washington was president, he stepped away from the presidency after serving 2 terms, and he issued a farewell address, which was probably not written by him, and it was not delivered by him, but now presidents deliver it at the end. Joe Biden delivered his farewell address at the end of his term as president. And you should know that George Washington recommended we avoid alliances with other countries, and we be aware of the dangers of political parties. You should know the Monroe Doctrine. They love to ask questions about the Monroe Doctrine, and that's a foreign policy statement that warns Europe to stay out of South America, that we will take offense to any military presence from another country trying to recolonize anything in South America. That's a flex of the United States in the 1723-ish. You should know Abraham Lincoln, and you should be familiar with how Abraham Lincoln, number one, his goal at the start of the Civil War. When the Civil War starts, his goal of the Civil War was to keep the United States united, preserve the Union. That's the verbiage from Abraham Lincoln. And if you see a question about that many times is the exact verbiage that they would use: preserve the Union. You show that Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus. You may see a document set tomorrow that demonstrates how people can have their civil liberties suspended or limited during times of war. And Abraham Lincoln is the first president who suspends the writ of habeas corpus. He puts people in Maryland in prison without charging them with anything, which is a violation of their civil rights. But the Supreme Court says during times of war, you should expect that the government has to keep security, keep us safe. And the Supreme Court case that they will ask about on this test would be Schenck versus United States. That's a World War I case where a socialist was giving out leaflets telling people to resist the draft. And he was incarcerated, and he sued, and he lost. And the Supreme Court said that your freedom of speech has always been limited, and certainly it's limited during times of war. So your freedom of speech, if you go to the airport, you don't have the same freedom of speech. If you go to school, your freedom of speech is not the same as it is when it's on the street, right? You can't go, the example they give is going into a crowded theater and yelling fire, right? In class, I like to talk about me going to the airport and making, singing the bomb song. Bomb, 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 bomb. You can't sing that song at the airport. Your freedom of speech is limited. It will create a panic. It will create fear. So Abraham Lincoln, suspension of the writ of habeas corpus. You should certainly know the Teddy Roosevelt presidency. Theodore Roosevelt not only is he New York's president, Teddy Roosevelt is from Teddy Roosevelt is from Long Island, lived in Nassau County. Summer White House is in Oyster Bay. And Teddy Roosevelt represents a turning point in the presidency. He is the first progressive president. And as president, he takes the spirit of the progressive era and brings it to the federal government. Teddy Roosevelt was an accidental president, became president. They put him vice president because they couldn't control him. They could not get him to stop trying to reform and improve the United States government and the functioning of the government. But when McKinley is assassinated, he becomes president, and the legislation you should associate with Teddy Roosevelt, the two big pieces of legislation would be, number one, the Pure Food and Drug Act. You can't put cocaine as an ingredient in toothache drops anymore. Dangerous ingredients will be regulated by the government. Recently, the government, I think, got rid of Red Number 40 just a few months ago, right? So we still benefit from the Pure Food and Drug Act. And the Meat Inspection Act is another big federal legislation that we would associate with the Roosevelt presidency. That legislation allows the government to go in and inspect slaughterhouses. There was a book called The Jungle, and it's an example of muckraking. And The Jungle demonstrated the terrible, dangerous conditions of slaughterhouses. Dead rats, poison bread, rat feces were going into the hopper and coming out and being served to people as sausage. So the federal government during the progressive era will expand its powers. And that's kind of the spirit of the government today, right? We have government regulation of big industries to keep people safe. Some of it has been undone. It's still a battle between liberty, capitalism, and American safety. So after him, what are the presidents? I mean, I would definitely know and be familiar with Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society. Lyndon Johnson's Great Society program is an expansion of the New Deal, although it's a time of peace. Lyndon Johnson's Great Society is going to declare war, jihad, on poverty. Not by killing people who live in poverty, but by providing for low-income families and making sure everyone in the United States has enough to eat, and making sure that everyone has access to information. Funds NPR, funds Channel 13, it funds Head Start programs so kids can get into nursery school and learn their letters if they come from a disadvantaged household. It does a lot for civil rights, but the Great Society is something that you're expected to be familiar with, and you should understand that the main idea of it is that government can take action, government can legislate solutions, right? These are democratic programs, and the Republicans hate these programs, right? I'm not saying these programs are good or bad. Hold on one second. We got a storm coming in, people. Weather's changing here in Oceanside. So Lyndon Johnson, Great Society. They love on the New York State Regents to ask you what interfered with the success of these programs. And one of the things they want you to understand is that the Vietnam War, which I see was a question. Lyndon Johnson is the president that gets credit for escalating the number of troops we have in Vietnam. And because of that escalation, because of the cost of sending 500,000 troops to Vietnam, the president of the United States, he can't fund everything. Can't fund both. But the legacy of Medicaid, Medicare, those are Great Society programs. It's with us today. So if you have to evaluate the extent, they're going to give you documents to evaluate it. But you should know that these programs exist today to help millions of Americans today. The right side, the Republicans would argue that they're a problem, though. That when you help people, they have a hard time being motivated to help themselves. Okay, Vietnam War. You want to talk Vietnam? Is my mic all right? Can you hear me? I hope you guys can hear me all right. Yeah, that's right. No bombs. No bombs. Let's talk about the Vietnam War. Haley Reed, who's a great student, and I appreciate the question. That's the next question in order there. So what do you need to know about the Vietnam War? We could spend 3.5 months studying the Vietnam War. Fascinating, interesting, but you need to know that, number one, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which didn't really happen. It was an exaggerated incident by Lyndon Johnson, and that comes out later on, and that helps create this distrust that Americans have with the federal government in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. The Gulf of Tonkin incident that occurs allows Lyndon Johnson to request permission to send troops to Vietnam. He says the United States Navy was attacked by the Viet Cong, by the North Vietnamese Army, rather, and he gets permission from Congress. He basically gets a blank check to send troops. And the President of the United States, 1965, is sending hundreds and thousands of troops to fight against the spread of communism. The Vietnam War is a war of containment. The goal is to stop the spread of communism. The United States is not there to fight the North Vietnamese Army. In the few battles where we fought the North Vietnamese Army, we destroyed and won, and were victorious in these battles. But the United States is occupying South Vietnam. So you bring offense as an invading army, even if you're there for positive reasons, just by your presence. Your presence brings offense. We learned that with the British occupation of the colonies, right? We should have known better. But we also have a hard time because in South Vietnam, the North Vietnamese military is supplying weapons to people in their homes. And these people are not wearing uniforms. They are farmers by day and they are soldiers at night. Charlie owns the night was the saying in Vietnam. So when soldiers would walk around during the day comfortably, at night they'd go to sleep and they would get shot at from villages where they were in the day before without a problem. So Vietnam becomes a mess because we can't identify who the enemy is. We're having a very hard time doing so. And a lot of civilians die in this process of us trying to find Charlie. So what happens is that this killing of civilians upsets the American public. This Vietnam War is televised. It's the first living room war. Everyone's got a color TV in their house, and they're coming home and they're seeing footage from Vietnam. It does not look like it's going well. And people are protesting outside the White House every day. Hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? And it impacted Lyndon Johnson, so much so that Lyndon Johnson does not run for president for a second term. And Nixon comes in. We love Richard Nixon, but he is shady AF. Richard Nixon comes in and says, hey, do not negotiate with Lyndon Johnson. Negotiate with me. I'm going to be the next president. I'll give you a better deal. And Richard Nixon has a very hard time negotiating the end of the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War will end in 1973. This is off my head. I believe it's 1973. But you should know that the United States leaves some troops in South Vietnam. And in about 2 years, North Vietnam, 1975, will invade South Vietnam, and the United States takes no action. American public was disgusted with the fiasco of the Vietnam War, and there is only one Vietnam. North Vietnam invades South Vietnam, reunites Vietnam. These guys are inspired by the American Revolution, actually. They look up to Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. But they reunite their country, and they become a communist country. We did not contain communism in Vietnam. And that's usually all you would need to know for this test in the Vietnam War. The other thing, they have shown some documents about protesters, right? This part of the reason why this war ends is because of massive public protest. People take to the streets and people protest and demand an end to the war. You want to go? We can go over a couple of multiple choice questions, sure. Spanish-American War, Jordan. Let's talk about the Spanish-American War. All right. How do you structure it? What? Hey, priest, would you just get to this? We went over the essay. We'll come back to that. Tulisia, yo, shout out to Tulisia Niranjan. Check it out, man. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. So, Spanish-American War is a war for empire. The United States flirts with this idea of imperialism. Imperialism is a foreign policy where more powerful countries take over weaker countries. You can't say big and small. England's a tiny island that controlled the 13 colonies. That's 1,000 times its size. Imperialism, you learned in global history about the division of Africa. In U.S. history, for this course, you need to know the Spanish-American War. And the Spanish-American War, we're going to think about the USS Maine. The USS Maine was stationed off the coast of Cuba, and there was an explosion. And today, historians don't doubt that the explosion was probably a coal fire on the ship. It was something internal. But this Spanish-American War starts because after the Maine is sunk, people like Teddy Roosevelt, people that wanted to go to war to take these possessions from Spain, and they thought that imperialism was the right foreign policy for the United States at the time. They used the sinking of the Maine to ignite public opinion against Spain, and people are just struck with war fever. To hell with Spain, remember the Maine is the rally cry of 1898. And the United States, despite any evidence that Spain did, why would Spain do this? Why would Spain start a fight? What are you, stupid? They're going to lose. They would not be smart. You don't punch. Mike Tyson walks in there. You don't punch Mike Tyson in the face unless you're me, because I can handle Mike Tyson. But if it was you don't do that. That's not going to be good for you. So we go to war with Spain. We smack Spain around in a few months. We fight Spain and the Philippines. What are we doing in the Philippines? We're going to take the Philippines from Spain. The United States takes Puerto Rico, takes Cuba, takes Guam from Spain in the Spanish-American War. More people died from illness in the Spanish-American War than they did fighting against Spain. And if you have to write about this tomorrow, here's a fun piece of outside information. Teddy Roosevelt led a charge. He resigned as Assistant Secretary of the U.S. Navy to fight in the Spanish-American War, and then he led a charge up a hill because he's stupid and he's crazy. You don't do that, but he does it, and it works out for him. He's a hero, and the United States wins. Now, the controversy comes with the acquiring of an empire. Right? People in the United States are saying, wait, this is contradictory to American liberty. How can the United States take over other places? When we were controlled by England, we hated it. We had a war against it. But the anti-imperialists, who were led by a lot of intellectuals, Mark Twain was an anti-imperialist, they lose. But now the United States has to fight the Philippines. The Philippines don't want us there. The Philippines are having a war for independence, and they say, get the hell out of here. And we don't really teach that in this course, but we should take note of the fact that the United States had to negotiate with the Philippines, and we negotiated for their eventual total liberty because they fought hard to get us out of there. And it's a very short-lived experiment with imperialism for the United States. We're cool with the Philippines today because when Japan invaded the Philippines, the United States liberated the Philippines. And that's the Spanish-American War. War for empire. We acquire the Philippines. We got Puerto Rico. We negotiate with Cuba for Cuba's liberty, but we take and keep Guantanamo Bay. Where's the variant cameo? You guys are great. I'm working on that. I don't know how to do it. All right, Supreme Court cases. We went over a couple big Supreme Court cases. Some Supreme Court cases to know. Yeah, I can go over the Cold War. Jaden's been studying I don't know who Jaden is. Which Jaden? There's a lot of Jadens out there that are studying. So how about Supreme Court cases? Korematsu versus United States was on the last test. You should definitely know Korematsu versus the United States. The zone seedling. I don't know who that is or what that means. Fred Korematsu was incarcerated and they've asked a multiple choice question. They've asked the Civics Literacy essay about Japanese internment. You should know Japanese internment. When World War II started in the United States, why the United States entered the war is what we need to know for our course. The United States was bombed December 7th, 1941 at a naval base, Pearl Harbor, right? Which we took Hawaii. That's an example of imperialism, actually. We just invaded Hawaii, took it over. Queen Liliuokalani, she didn't even fight. She had dudes in grass skirts, and the U.S. Marines were there. But that's a story for another day. Let's stay focused here on Fred Korematsu. So the Japanese are forced to go to prison camps. We call them internment camps. They're concentration camps where everyone from Japanese ancestry is concentrated far away from the coast, but they're not getting murdered, unlike the German concentration camps where they systematically killed people and attempted to eliminate all the Jews from Europe. So in the American concentration camps, the Japanese are brought inland. They're brought to Wyoming. They're brought far away from the West Coast, where it was thought some of these Japanese Americans and Americans of Japanese ancestry. There's tens and thousands of Americans born on American soil. 14th Amendment. Guys, you got to know the 14th Amendment. 14th Amendment says you're born in the United States, you are an American citizen. But these Japanese are rounded up. They're put into camps. And Fred's a smart guy. He says, I'm going to lawyer up. I'm going to sue. So he sues in Korematsu versus United States. Supreme Court case you should know. Korematsu sues for his liberty, and he loses. Again, this is another example. We spoke about habeas corpus earlier of the United States saying during times of war, your civil liberties can be limited. You don't have the same rights you have during times of peace. So because Japan had attacked us, for public safety, all Japanese must be moved, because there were some spies. There certainly were some spies, although no Americans were convicted of being spies, and none of the people in the internment camps. In fact, some people volunteered from the internment camps. I'm going to get emotional. They volunteered to go fight in the United States Army, fight for America, fight for liberty in World War II. They fight against Japan, and they proved to be very brave and very valuable to the cause. So Fred Korematsu sues and he loses. You should know that when Ronald Reagan was president, Congress issued an apology. The president of the United States apologized and said this was wrong. And every survivor of Japanese internment was awarded a $20,000 cash apology. Remember that when the Japanese were forced to go to internment camps, they had to sell everything they owned very quickly, which you don't get the value for anything when you have to sell it quickly. And $20,000 isn't a lot of money, but the United States acknowledged, apologized, and tried to build that relationship back. Beautiful moment in United States history. Another big Supreme Court case. Yeah, the Dred Scott decision. Let's talk about the Dred Scott decision. Absolutely. Yeah, let's talk about Dred Scott. Whoever you are, whoever this person is. Dred Scott was a slave who sued for his freedom, right? His owner takes him to the north, and his owner dies. And this is 1854, 1850. It's in the 1850s, which is a time period of a lot of drama and controversy and tension in U.S. history, because we know the Civil War is 1860, right? So 1850 to 1860 it's a dumpster fire. It's problem after problem after problem. And this is one of the problems. The Dred Scott ruling is a problem that throws some, to use a term my daughter taught me, gaslighting. No, not gaslighting. Rage baiting. Sorry, rage baiting. It doesn't really fit here. Sorry. I tried, G. Dred Scott's owner dies, and Dred Scott sues for his freedom. And this court case makes it all the way to the Supreme Court. That's how we get a landmark ruling, guys. If the Supreme Court votes, then if the Supreme Court makes a ruling, then it sets a precedent. How do I make it? You guys are hysterical. There's no donations accepted today. I appreciate it though. Thanks. I probably know that guy. I might be related to him actually. So Dred Scott sues and he loses. And you need to know the Dred Scott case, because they ask about it very regularly on this assessment, U.S. history, New York State assessment. He loses, and the Supreme Court rules that Dred Scott is a slave, and slaves are property, and property cannot bring cases to court. Furthermore, they rule that Congress cannot stop the spread of slavery to any part of the United States. So basically overturns the Missouri Compromise, which they ask about that, I think, less on this test. But you should know that slaves are property according to the Dred Scott ruling. And then you should also know that it's overturned by the 14th Amendment. Just not even 10 years later, or about 10 years later, the 14th Amendment, which could be 1867, actually, could be 10 years exactly. Thanks, Tyler. Appreciate you. My pleasure. If you want to talk U.S. history, I'm here. Let's talk U.S. history. The 14th Amendment says everyone born in the United States is born a citizen of the United States. So let's look at three amendments from Reconstruction, because you should know the three Reconstruction Amendments. They're very commonly asked about on this assessment. So the first amendment is 13. The 13th Amendment ended slavery in the United States of America. And it's interesting because there were no southern states in American Congress, but it was very difficult to get the 13th Amendment ratified. 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment said all people born in the United States of America Should we know all the cases? Soda. You should know a few Supreme Court cases that are commonly assessed. You should know every Supreme Court case. This is not AP Gov. The 14th Amendment says you're born in the United States, you're born a citizen of the United States. Every citizen is entitled to due process. Life, liberty, and property are protected for American citizens. They cannot be denied without due process. And the 15th Amendment, you should know, the 15th Amendment says you can't stop someone from voting because of their gender. And I know gender is controversial. I'm not talking like pansexual. I'm talking male, female, biological identity in the 1870s. If you were born by, I lied. The 15th Amendment says you can't stop someone from voting because of their skin color. I just got confused with the 19th Amendment, guys. The 15th Amendment says you can't stop black males from voting because they're black. That's basically what it says. And then women don't get the right to vote, sadly. Black males get the right to vote, just like Barack Obama became president before we had a female president, right? The American public feels more comfortable with a male of color, isn't that interesting, than a female leader. Black males won the right to vote before females got the right to vote. And let's talk about females getting the right to vote. You should know Seneca Falls Convention of 1848. In 1848, at Seneca Falls, upstate New York, they love to ask New York questions. Triangle Shirtwaist Factory happened in New York. Teddy Roosevelt's from New York. Seneca Falls, this meeting where women and some males were there at the meeting. William Lloyd Garrison's there. They draw up a declaration of sentiments. They declare how they feel. And the most important demand they have is the right to vote. Women need to get the right to vote. Everything can be corrected if women have the right to vote. Women couldn't go to college. Women couldn't have good jobs. Women could be the victims of divorce, but they could not initiate a divorce. They list, just like the Declaration of Independence, list of problems. They ask for the right to vote. 1848 to 1920, right? It takes 72 years for women to get the right to vote, and that's a theme in U.S. history. Change takes time. The United States has made tremendous changes, but it takes time for a movement to take hold and to convince people that the change is necessity, right? Because you have to change a mindset if you want to make change. So you should know women's suffrage and connect that to the 19th Amendment. Can I go over the New Deal, Anthony Smith? Yeah, I'd love to go over the New Deal. Thanks for tuning in, buddy. I appreciate you. Appreciate the question. So the New Deal is a government program from the Great Depression, right? The Great Depression is the worst economy in United States history. It starts when Herbert Hoover is president. And very quickly, 1932, 1933, unemployment is at 25%. 1 out of every 4 Americans who want to work can't find work. It's the worst economy in United States history. And Herbert Hoover is very reluctant. And they've asked, question 29 and 30 have been on Hoover and Roosevelt and making that comparison. So we should expect a question on Hoover's approach to dealing with the worst economy in United States history. And that answer is very limited, right? He believes in laissez-faire, hands off, don't touch the economy, because he's a Republican. And Republicans think the government functions best with minimal government interference. So when banks are closing down and people are losing their life savings, he's doing very little to take action. Not because he doesn't care, because he thinks that will create more problems than will actually solve and help. He does come around and does a couple government programs, big construction projects. We get the Hoover Dam. He does. He has the government intervene because so many people were foreclosing and being thrown out of their homes. He comes up with a program where government's going to take some, but it's not too little, too late. American public hates him. They associate Hoover with the Great Depression, right? If you got an empty pocket, right, we call that a Hoover flag. If you live in a shack of random wood and cardboard boxes. It's called a Hoover house. A bunch of them is called a Hooverville. If you got a pot of water and you got a carrot and a potato, you call that Hoover stew. Good outside information if you're writing a civics literacy essay tomorrow on the Great Depression, right? You want to contextualize the Depression. He is replaced by the most successful president in United States history, a New Yorker, upstate Tuxedo Park. You can go visit his house. I didn't offer extra credit to my students for visiting his house. I had Kayla Duncan, shout out to her. She's not even in this chat. But she went to Teddy Roosevelt's house last month to get high on history. Franklin Roosevelt becomes president in 1932. He will win the election of 1936, the election of 1940, the election of 1944. He is the most successful president in U.S. history. Now, the Constitution has been changed. You can only run for president. You can only serve 2 terms as president. So the way the Constitution is now, we won't see that again. The Constitution can change, right? It's beautiful that it's flexible and it can be amended. But Franklin Roosevelt serves 4 terms. And his program to end the Great Depression is the New Deal, Anthony Smith, the New Deal. The New Deal has 3 parts. Part 1, relief. The government is going to give money to people who can't pay their electric bill to make sure they have electricity because they got children. People need electricity. People need heat. You can't pay the gas bill. Here's some money to pay your bills. That's relief. Relief is food. Relief is money to pay your bills. Relief keeps you in your house. And we have relief programs today. Food stamps are relief programs, right? Direct relief. Now, Herbert Hoover was adamantly against it. Franklin Roosevelt said, people who don't have food don't need a long-term solution, right? Hunger needs a short-term solution. But that's only one part of the program. Recovery. How do we end this terrible economy of the 1930s? Franklin Roosevelt says, we're going to give people jobs. If he passes a lot of legislation that's going to help the private sector rejuvenate, and a lot of it's declared unconstitutional, actually. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes. But he also, the government, the CCC, the PWA, massive construction projects, building of roads, building of airports, building all over Nassau County, Long Island, where I'm located, right? I live in Oceanside, and there's an extension to my kindergarten center, and it says 1934. That's a New Deal. That gym extension was built as part of the New Deal. The government employs people. You don't want to give people money for doing nothing, right? Give them opportunities to work. That puts some money in their pocket. They go out and spend money, and the economy grows. Franklin Roosevelt in the New Deal takes this part very seriously. Can never get unemployment below 10%. Can never get unemployment back down to single digits. World War II is what will end the Great Depression. But he took so much action and gave so many people jobs that he kept getting reelected because people felt like he was trying. With Hoover, they felt like he wasn't doing anything. He wasn't trying. Franklin Roosevelt, it's been said, he couldn't get rid of the Depression, but he made it palatable. People felt like they could accept it and deal with it because this guy was going to make it better. And then finally, the third R, Anthony Smith, of the New Deal is reform. Now, what do we need to know about reform? Number 1, Social Security Act. They love to ask about the Social Security Act. Every American will pay Social Security tax. My friends in this chat, if you got a job on the books, you are paying Social Security tax. My first job at 15 on the books, I worked at McDonald's in Rosedale on Merrick Road near Hook Creek Boulevard. They took out Social Security. That's a reform program so that when I turn 65 or 62, you get to choose. You have some income coming in. My dad's a senior citizen, and he is collecting Social Security. He worked for 5 decades, and now he gets to collect Social Security. So it's your money, but it's a reform because during the Depression, old people had to eat cat food. Old people died of malnutrition and starvation. Now there's some money coming in so people can survive. Social Security. And today it's been expanded. It includes disability and unemployment insurance. You lose your job, you're going to collect money from Social Security until you find another job. And the other big reform would be the federal bank insurance, FDIC, that insures your bank account for up to $250,000 today, something like that. If a bank closed during the Depression, before Roosevelt came to office, if a bank closed, everyone lost their life savings in the bank. Bank is closed. What? There were people that saved their whole life for retirement, 30 years, 40 years, bank closed, money gone. Now with the government insurance, your money is safe. If a bank goes out of business, your life savings are secured. And that's another example of reform. So what do we give credit to FDR and the New Deal for? There has never been a depression of this magnitude again. So if we're evaluating, that's a civics literacy essay, right? You have to, part 3, you have to do 3 things in the essay tomorrow. 1, historical context. 2, discuss the actions people took. Describe the actions people took to deal with this issue. How did they address the issue? What did government do? What did groups do? What did labor unions do? Whatever the issue is. And then the third one is evaluate the extent to which they were successful, right? So Franklin Roosevelt was not successful at getting rid of the Great Depression, but he was successful at preventing another depression of this magnitude from ever happening. We've never seen double-digit unemployment during a terrible economy in American history since, right? The Great Recession, the worst economy since the New Deal, is nothing compared to the Great Depression. And we also want to credit for FDR with preventing a communist overthrow of the American system, right? If people don't have food, communism becomes very attractive because communism will give every person money and a job and the means to get by. So the fact that American capitalism and American democracy prevail is a big victory. And our system has been modified. Some people don't like the modifications in the system, right? In 1938, we got the Fair Labor Standards Act, and the Fair Labor Standards Act establishes minimum wage, right? 1938, we got the first minimum wage in U.S. history. We still have a minimum wage. So government now says you got to pay this much, period. Many states, Nassau County, New York City, we have much higher minimum wage than the national minimum. You can exceed it, but no one can go below it. All right. What else are we want to talk about? Is there any short question other than the essay? There's question 29 and 30. Okay. And if you haven't taken a practice test, guys, you should take a practice test. The last 7 U.S. history regents are online with the answers and with sample essays. Is there anything specific you think? Yeah, I don't like making predictions, but I'll make some predictions. We haven't seen a civics literacy essay on labor. And I think labor is something that we can kind of anticipate, maybe. Being a civics literacy essay, I don't know if it's going to happen tomorrow, but it can. So you should know the historical context of the fact that people who worked suffered, their lives were in danger at work. People got hurt at work all the time. Children were working. Children worked on farms, so it was a natural progression to get children to work in factories. By 1900, something like 2 million children were working full-time in factories. Dangerous place. And workers started to create these groups called unions. The Knights of Labor is a famous example of an attempt to unionize large numbers of people so they can negotiate better conditions, better wages, better hours. And it's a process that goes on for decades and decades and decades. The Great Depression will help labor make really, really big gains because when so many people are suffering, That motivates people to protest and demand change, right? When times are good, the economy of the 1920s, that was good for a lot of people. Even poor people were investing money in the stock market and things were better. If your life is better and you think you have economic opportunity, you're not protesting, right? And we don't see change unless we get a big movement and a lot of people demanding that change and protesting. And the suffering of the Depression is what gave, thousands, hundreds and thousands of Americans join unions, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of strikes in a very short period of time. And the federal government acknowledges the legitimacy of unions and really empowers labor as a group to take action and to try to demand change. Can we look at some multiple choice? Yeah, sure. Just the short essay questions, guys. There's only 2 parts. Write as much as you can for question 29. Part 1, historical context, 29 and 30. Write as much as you can, and then answer the question directly. What writing strategies would I recommend for part 2? Okay. Let's see if I can pull up that test again. I closed it. All right. Cause and effect, some difference or turning point. I think that when you look at the question, which oh boy, I'm cooked, bro. I'm cooked. I know what I did. I think the best one to choose is going to be kind of based on the documents, right? So if you were looking at question number 29 on the last test, I'm gonna try one more time. Okay, share. Bam. No, I'm black. Okay. Yes. So when you look at these documents, we see 14th and 15th Amendment, and then we see we see U.S. Constitution, 14th to 15th Amendment, right? So this is 1860, 1870. And then we see Susan B. Anthony still can't vote, though, right? So which ones would I choose? If I were writing that, I would choose difference, right? There's a big difference between the liberties and the Constitution and the liberties women have. There is no wrong answer. It's hard for me to, I'm not going to just make a blanket. But for question 30, I personally would talk about bias for whatever document they give me. Again, you want to look at the document and see which one you could say the most about. The best answer for you is, which one do I know the most about? But I like to talk about bias because everything's biased. Everyone is biased, right? I'm biased. I love U.S. history. That's my bias, right? So if you can identify the bias, that's great. But if you can't identify the bias, it does you no good. Who is the audience? Who is this person speaking to, right? And how is that going to impact whether or not this is reliable? That's probably something that would be very friendly as well for you to discuss, depending on, right, what they give you. Tyler, I just went over Seneca Falls. I went over Seneca Falls in depth. But the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848 is the launch pad for the women's rights movement. Jill asks, if we write something incorrect, do we get points off? Probably not. If it's a very egregious, thing you say, maybe, but probably not. Probably not. If you're not sure of a year, then don't write a year, right? be vague unless you're 100% certain maybe with what you're saying. But if you do have correct historical context, that's going to help you more so than wrong stuff is going to hurt you. All right, so someone has to go over 2 multiple choice questions, guys. I got 2 multiple choice questions on the screen here. We're going to wrap it up. I'm so glad that you guys tuned in, though. I wish you all the best. Thanks for all of your hard work, and thanks for tuning in, guys, on a Thursday night. Happy Emancipation Day. Let's celebrate the end of slavery in the United States. Juneteenth, Emancipation Day. We mentioned the 13th Amendment earlier. So here we see they gave us a statement on signing the Social Security Act, and then they give us 2 questions about the Social Security Act. According to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, a major purpose. Now, you don't even need to know anything about U.S. history to answer this question correct, right? Just look at this document, okay? My mother could get this question right. My mother's a great lady. I'm not being disrespectful to her, but she didn't study U.S. history in the United States. She studied a little U.S. history to pass the citizenship test. Much respect to my mom, who became a citizen just a few years ago. By the way, she didn't ask me for any help. It's weird. Question 17. According to FDR, major purpose. Answers right in the document, right? Correct answer has to be 4. Provide benefits to jobless and aged citizens, right? If you have a little money coming, when you get older, it's going to be hard for you to work. Some people love to work. My dad is still working. He's a soccer and a lacrosse referee. He loves working. But many older people, they get to the point where they don't want to work anymore, or they can't work. They don't really have skills that an employer wants. So this idea of Social Security, it's a forced pension system, right? You're going to pay money into this system, and then one day you're going to be old and you're going to take some money back, hopefully, right? And you'll take a lot of it back. And then question 18. By signing the Social Security Act into law, President Roosevelt was keeping his promise that the federal government would. The correct answer is question 1. I'm sorry. I'm live on YouTube. My wife wants to know if I fed the dog. Yeah, Regina, I fed the dog. Couldn't wait 3 minutes. We're ending at 8 o'clock. Take a more active role in the economy to improve the well-being of citizens, right? Social Security is about the government taking action. This is the richest country on the planet. We are going to do things to make sure everyone has some support, a safety net, so to speak, right? In the United States, safety net is not a choice. A safety net in terms of Social Security, it's not much of a safety net, right? But it's a small safety net. It's going to support you. You can't support you entirely, guys. You know, if you're in my economics class, you got to retire with $5 million. Start saving from that first paycheck. Very important, but it's something. All right, guys. Much love to you. Wish you guys all the best tomorrow. Is it allowed? What is that? There are the practice tests that the New York State Regents has released, and you'll find them online. You'll find them with the answers. Take a practice test, because a lot of information will repeat itself. Should I do the essays first? Definitely do the multiple choice first, man. Do the 28 multiple choice questions, then do question 29, then do question 30. You have 3 hours. I'm a slow test taker. For me, it's more than enough time. I think 99% of you, it'll be more than enough time. But make sure you write that civics literacy essay is worth 20 to 25%, depending on how many points you get in the first part of your final grade. So you want to make sure you write that civics literacy essay. You write all three parts. You use 4 or 5 documents to support your answer. Don't quote from the documents. Summarize the document, and then talk about how the document supports us understanding the action people took, or it demonstrates that the action people took was successful. All right, man. Love you guys. Go get high on history. Kick butt tomorrow. Peace out.